popularity of dystopian fiction has been observed to spike after large geopolitical events, such as both world wars, the 9/11 attacks, and then curiously again in 2008 after the release of The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Following the publication of this series and the success of the movie adaptations, we saw a craze of dystopian media in the 2010s aimed at young adults. These notably diverged from previous dystopian narratives that focused on internal rebellion and had largely pessimistic endings, instead featuring action-packed, violent revolutions with triumphant victories over their oppressive states. The Hunger Games, whilst propelling YA dystopia to a commercially successful trend, was not the first YA dystopia to be written. That mantle goes to the 1993 novel The Giver by Lois Lowry. Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman also predates The Hunger Games, published in 2001. By reading and analysing The Giver, Noughts and Crosses, and The Hunger Games, I will be exploring the young protagonists themselves and why dystopian fiction deeply resonates with younger audiences. Dystopia falls under the umbrella of speculative fiction, meaning a type of story or literature that is set in a world that is different from the one we live in, or that deals with magical or imagined future events. Under this umbrella term, you can find science fiction, fantasy, horror, superhero fiction, and supernatural fiction. You can also find utopia and dystopia. Utopia and dystopia are often depicted as two sides of the same coin. Utopia is the ideal, perfect society, or at least what the author believes to be the perfect society. Dystopia is the opposite, a society that embodies what the author believes to be a pressing social or political issue. This could be misogyny and religious extremism, nationalism and propaganda, climate change, or technology. For The Giver, it is apathy and conformity, Noughts and Crosses, discrimination and racism, and for The Hunger Games, it is classism and war. The method used in this presentation is library research, drawing on both general information about dystopian fiction in regards to younger audiences and close readings of the primary texts. There is also a great deal of research into the authors themselves, the socio-political events that shaped them, and the critical receptions in news articles of both the primary texts and their on-screen adaptations. The first research procedure is a close reading of the primary texts. Secondly, tracking the protagonist's character development throughout the narratives. Thirdly, applying the scholarly research to these findings to provide evidence on the importance and cultural impact that these books had on children's literature. The Giver by Lois Lowry was published in 1993, and it presents a utopian society with no poverty, hunger, or crime. It is also devoid of choice, individualism, emotion, and colour, as each member of the community has a daily pill that suppresses these, adopting the state of sameness. When the children of this society are declared 12 years old in the ceremony of 12, they are given the career that they will have for the rest of their lives. Our protagonist, Jonas, is selected as the receiver of memory, the most revered position in the community. Jonas meets the previous receiver, now called the Giver, one of the community elders whose job it is to pass down the memories of human history. As Jonas learns more and starts to experience emotion and colour, he has to wrestle with new emotions and the hypocrisy of the society that he lives in. Jonas changes rapidly over the course of the book. At the beginning, he is polite, compassionate, and whilst curious, he obeys and accepts the life that he is living. After all, he doesn't know any other way to live. The more memories he experiences, the more complicated he becomes. His pre-existing traits become stronger, and he becomes angry and restless, wanting to share his knowledge with his family and his friends, but feeling hopeless as to how. The climax of the novel comes when Jonas learns that when the community releases people to elsewhere, when they are too weak, too old, or unable to conform, it actually means that they are killed. Horrified by this, and realizing that they intend to release the baby who has been placed in his family unit, Gabriel, he and the Giver decide that he must run away to save the baby and inspire the community. By leaving, all the memories that Jonas had received would be transferred back to the citizens, so that they would be enlightened as Jonas had been. The Giver stays in the community to help them come to terms with their new emotions, and Jonas kidnaps Gabriel, disappearing into the cold snow in search of elsewhere. We do not see the impact of Jonas's sacrifice as the novel ends with him sledding down a hill towards music and singing. The ending is left purposely ambiguous, however Lowry has confirmed that Jonas and Gabriel do survive.
Why did you end The Giver like that?
Why did I end The Giver like that? I always thought it was an optimistic ending, and it was after that I began to realize that some people thought the boy was dead that I later went on to write 2 more books, and the boy Jonas appears 7 years later as a man in the book Messenger. So it is a happy ending, and you'll see him later on. And the baby Gabriel is also alive and well.
The age of Jonas is particularly significant, as his age shows his innocence and naivety. Around this age is when a child would ordinarily begin to tackle bigger emotions, and there is a level of irony that the wisest member of the community, the one who knows more than anyone else, is a 12-year-old boy. He is both childish in his wants, wanting more free time to play and having a crush on his friend Fiona, but he understands the importance of his role and is completely selfless, as shown by his decision to leave, despite the dangers. The trek through the snow may not have the explosive theatrics of other heroic deeds, but it is no less heroic, and the book has left a lasting impression on its readers, both negative, as it is one of the most challenged books in the USA, and positive, as it is a common book to be studied in schools and won the 1994 Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American children's literature. Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman was written in 2001 and is an alternate history dystopia where Europe was colonised by Africa. The Crosses are the black ruling class of Albion, a future version of Britain, and the Noughts are the white lower class. The series follows Sephi, a privileged cross, and Callum, her Noughts childhood friend. Sephi and Callum's friendship becomes romantic, and they have to navigate their relationship in a society where this is unacceptable. Sephi is the daughter of a prominent political figure and is naive to the injustice surrounding her, but as the story progresses, she becomes more and more aware of the prejudices that not just her society has, but that she has herself. I'd be ashamed of them, and myself. I'd felt ashamed of myself a lot recently, and, if I'm honest, part of me resented Callum for it. I didn't want to feel guilty for just being, but that's how he was beginning to make me feel. Malorie Blackman describes Callum as the character most like herself, as a lot of the discrimination that Callum faces is what Blackman has experienced herself. Callum is naive like Sephi, but has more of an understanding from watching the struggles of his family and his community, though he doesn't know the full extent. He is hopeful that by being one of the first Nought students at an all-cross school, that he can make a difference and change the system, but quickly becomes disillusioned by this after seeing his father wrongfully arrested and killed while in custody. This book is well worth the read, so without spoiling the ending for anyone who wants to experience it, I will say that this book doesn't give us the quick resolution to the problems with Albion society, as Malorie Blackman points out that there is no quick and easy solution to institutional racism and discrimination. Noughts and Crosses is a game that no one really plays much past childhood, because once you've grasped its objective and tactics, it invariably ends in a draw, a no-win situation. At the risk of sounding arty-farty literati, I think that pretty much sums up racism. Ultimately, no one wins. The novel made the 2019 BBC list of 100 most inspiring novels. In the author's note before the book, Blackman writes that she knew the story would make people uncomfortable, but that was why it was important to write. And despite the struggles of the characters and the ongoing social injustices, there is some hope at the end of the novel that in time, change can occur. The epigraph of the book opens us to this before we even begin to read. It's some lyrics from the 80s song The Way It Is by Bruce Hornsby and The Range. That's just the way it is. Some things will never change. That's just the way it is. But don't you believe them? The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins was first published in 2008 and caused a flurry of young adult dystopian media to be released in the wake of its popularity. It follows 16-year-old Katniss Everdeen, a citizen of District 12, the poorest of the 12 districts that make up Pan Am, along with the capital. Every year, one boy and one girl between the ages of 12 and 18 from each district are picked to participate in the Hunger Games, a fight to the death that is televised and is mandatory to watch. It's designed to serve as a reminder to the districts of the capital's strength to strive off revolution and disorder. From the very first chapter, we get a clear view of Katniss. She is young, but resourceful. She is already actively disobeying the order of things by illegally hunting. She remarks that her sister's cat hates her because she tried to drown it, as it was just another mouth to feed. We feel her desperation and struggle to survive, but also her strong sense of morality. Even then, her rebellion is an act of necessity, and she feels like hoping for a bright future is futile. Katniss does not know who she is, and this lack of self-awareness scares her. She wears a mask of disinterest and apathy to protect herself and her family from the cruelty of the society that she lives in. Even after volunteering for the Hunger Games in place of her sister, she remains detached. Through the media circus she is forced to play in, to the first days of the Hunger Games themselves, where she forces herself not to grieve those lost, we see the mask stay in place. The first slip is only after the death of District 11 tribute Rue, who she became close to. One of the defining things about the Hunger Games, or what a lot of the buzz was about, was the love triangle between Katniss, fellow tribute Peter, and her childhood friend Gale. In the books, Katniss wrestles with romantic feelings for both, but ultimately knows that romance is the least of her worries. Giving light to one of my favourite quotes from the series, "I really can't think about kissing when I've got a rebellion to incite." After the first Hunger Games, Katniss wants to incite a rebellion, but doesn't realise that she unwittingly already had. Without knowing, her image is being moulded into that of the Mockingjay by rebellion leaders that she's not yet aware of. Katniss's internal journey to find herself is both helped and hindered by her need to survive, and she battles with feeling unworthy of the spectacle that follows her. I realise the answer to who I am lies in that handful of fruit. If I held them out to save Peter because I knew I'd be shunned if I came back without him, then I am despicable. If I held them out because I loved him, I am still self-centred, although forgivable. But if I held them out to defy the Capitol, I am someone of worth. The trouble is, I don't know exactly what was going on inside me at that moment. Katniss is a reluctant hero who feels like she has no control over her life. She is saddled with fighting for the lesser of two evils. The Hunger Games gives the reader a form of resolution with the success of the rebellion, but with the startling reminder that power, whoever holds it, corrupts. By the end of the series, Katniss is broken. She is plagued with grief and nightmares, but she lives and eventually finds peace with her new life. As to why these narratives became so popular, there have been many theories. Some critics claim that young people were attracted to these stories for the action and the romance, but there is more to it. Scott Westerfeld, author of the YA dystopian series Uglies, where plastic surgery is mandatory when citizens turn 16, thinks their success is partly thanks to high school being a dystopia. Author Julie Battaglia goes further, observing that bound by the rules of teachers, parents, and society, with little power of your own existence, life as a teenager can feel like living in an authoritarian state. Add in the peer pressures of cliques and rival gangs, and the school playground becomes a war zone. For girls, there's the straitjacket of looking physically right. The choice is to smother your individuality and fit in, or be an outsider. All of our protagonists here are outsiders. Jonas is set apart from the community immediately with his pale eyes. He, unlike anyone else, can see colour, has an ability of foresight, and when he is selected as receiver of memory, he is further ostracised. He can't conform anymore and is tormented by this and struggles with loneliness. Callum and Sephi's relationship sets them apart from the society they were raised in. By being together, they are defying the morals that were ingrained into them from birth and are forced to stay together in secret. And Katniss is seen as more of an icon, an image, rather than a person. She shies away from emotion and doesn't know who she is. This feeling of not belonging is one that most teenagers empathise with immediately, and seeing these characters reject the institutions that symbolise their ostracisation is cathartic. Additionally, we live in a time where we are bombarded with worst-case scenarios for the future, with terms like doom scrolling popping up in the last few years. In terms of YA dystopias in particular, the fact that teenagers are eagerly consuming these themes suggests that they are seeking a safe space to wrestle with, and perhaps displace, the fears they play upon, fears that are set and, not unimportantly, resolved amidst the comfortable narrative threads of young adult narratives. So this begs the question, if dystopia is so resonant with young readers, why did the dystopia craze fizzle out? Some say that it was the oversaturation of the genre, with a plethora of series with the same formula being released in such close succession. But if that was the case, then the Marvel Cinematic Universe would have died 10 years ago. But as a Polygon article posted last year so accurately observes, the genre failed to evolve. It also proposes that the reason YA dystopian media lost its momentum was because the readers set about acting on their drive for social change, rather than settling for just reading it. Young people are mounting more and more sophisticated political campaigns against the real-world dystopic futures they're facing. These narratives not only open their audiences to critique the injustices around them, but unlike dystopian works previously, also tell them that they are not helpless, that they can make a difference and challenge them. Annihilation of the central character is the norm in adult dystopia, Orwell's boot in the face. It's the author's grim warning to the reader, avoid this path, it will destroy us. The crucial difference in young adult fiction is that the endings contain the seeds of new beginnings. The human spirit is stamped upon, but not stamped out.